And welcome back to... Oh no, I've been pierced by an arrow. I shan't last much longer. I'm fading away. And welcome back to Devlog. In the last part, I have no idea. And in this part, I work on enemy AI and enemy functions and enemy visual effects. Hooray, enemies. Why add enemies? I need hazards and levels. Let's talk about enemy logic first of all. The enemies have different logic depending on what they do, so I'll first cover the base enemy logic. It is very simple. We check which direction the player is relative to the enemy, if they're to the left or right, above or below the enemy. Then the enemy will have a different animation based on the distance from the player and also the direction the player is in. Since enemies don't actually have any logic for turning around like the player, if the enemy is in front of the player or the player is behind the enemy, it won't actually turn around, it will just have a different animation play. All this really does is check animations down between if the player is close to this enemy or not, because non-enemies will actually move in game. Maybe some in later levels will, but the design for a lot of these enemies in these first levels that I'm designing is that they're mostly just static hazards that will have a fixed point in a level that the player has to avoid in some way. And I will get into this design later in the devlog. But this initial first enemy, all it does is it checks where the player is relative to it, and then when the player collides with it, it will deal damage to the player, as any regular hazards. This then also triggers an animation of this enemy hitting the player or performing some action that reads as the enemy damaging the player. The enemies then also have a set scripting for how they will be breaking. Similar to the breakable objects, I just attach the same scripting to it, and the enemy hazard logic will read from this if the player should be harmed or if this object should be destroyed. So if this object can be destroyed by dashing, or if its enemy can be destroyed by dashing and the player collides with it, instead of harming the player, we're going to destroy this object. If the player stands on the top of this object and this object can be destroyed by the player jumping on it, we will destroy this enemy like normal, like a breakable object. And this initial usage for the enemies is incredibly simple because they're basically just animated breakable objects that can occasionally punch the player in the face and murder them. The nuance just becomes in specific types of this enemy. For example, ones you can't jump on, ones that you can't touch even when dashing, that are more armoured and have more of a hazard behind them. These are the metal variants of enemies, which are very easily readable that you can't jump on them because this base one has a big spiky helmet that will poke your little toesies if you stand on it. And the teaching of this is that metal things can't be broken when dashing into them, but regular enemies can. So this adds variety to the base enemy logic, being that some of them can be broken when dashing into them and some of them can't be broken when dashing into them. But base enemies are very, very simple, they don't really do a whole lot. The next enemy type is the enemy blocking. This one's my absolute favorite. I love these types of enemies. These are very simple, they will not harm the player at all, and they will block the player with a shield so the player cannot get past them. In the same way as the regular enemies, there will be regular and metal variants of these. Regular ones can be broken by dashing, metal ones cannot be broken by dashing and needs to have an alternate method of breaking them. These ones are unique because they can actually be used as a walkable platform. If you were to land on the top of them, you obviously can't break them because they have a shield in the way, so you instead stand on their shield that they are holding above them. I love these little guys. They're my favorite. I love the little shield guys. I like the little motion of them holding the shield. Standing on them is funny. They're just a very fun little neat enemy that I have in my levels. There isn't much complexity with the actual danger behind these enemies. They're just little guys that get in your way. But if I want to add a very small platform in an area, I can use a shielded enemy instead of just a regular platform for variety. Maybe there will be some specific areas where they could block your way by stacking on top of each other and you have to break them to get through, but as far as level designs, I don't really have any usage for them in terms of hazards. They're just kind of cute. Next we have the projectile enemy. Oh yeah, baby, you want to talk about an annoying enemy type? Here it is. This is an enemy that you, specifically, watching this video, when you play this game, are going to hate. These are enemies that fire projectiles at you. They are the most annoying enemy to deal with. Do you know why I know this so concretely that you won't like this? Because I, person making this game, don't like these enemies. They're a bother, they're a real nuisance, and oh boy do they make testing levels real tricky because I have to account for any of these hazards that I've placed around. There are enemies that will just spit projectiles at you. Visually, I really like these. There's two different variants of enemy spitting. One of them has more of an animation behind it, where it's a plant on a vine that will move around and wiggle about. This adds some variety to the actual plant itself, but this is all just done with animations in the same way that any other of these enemies work, where the distance from the player will result in a specific animation being played, which just positions the head and therefore projectile area of this enemy. And the other variation is what I call the fuzzy spitter. These are little fuzzy guys with lips and they spit at you. Oh boy, do I love these enemies. The way this works is the same way as a regular enemy type. We'll check the distance from the player, but when the player gets close enough, we will just transition into firing a projectile instead of playing an animation. This is based on how close the player is to this enemy, and also a timer that ticks down from this enemy. Once the timer reaches 0, we fire a projectile and enter a recoil state, which then has another timer, and then we can fire more projectiles. The projectiles themselves are very, very simple. I just have a couple logics for overrides of specific projectiles for specific enemies, so some enemy projectiles can be a bit more hazardous. But for this level, they basically all work the same, where projectiles will float rather slowly towards the player with a little bit of tracking towards the player, so you can't dodge them super easy, and then they will hit the player and the player will die. Very, very simple. Just move over world space. If anything collides, chest, we can break it. If we can break it, break it. If it's a player, hurt the player. Otherwise, break on surface. It's a very simple projectile movement, but I really like it, and I like the enemies. These sound effects of these enemies that you can't hear, but I'll play it for you. And by play it for you, I mean make it for you. They have a weird little spitting sound effect, which is just me going. And it sounds gross and horrible, and I love it so much. Now to go over the design of these enemies. They fit more in the actual game design of the regular versus metal things in game, which I haven't gone over. Regular things can be broken by dashing, metal things can only be broken by potions or crushing objects or things like that, so the player can't really easily break metal objects unless they're throwing a potion. So the enemies have this same design. Obviously for a viewer watching this in a vacuum, it may not read very well that the metal objects and enemies can be broken with potions and not dashing, but this is taught to you in-game in the first level and is reinforced by the fact that enemies that are metal will usually have spikes on them to make it look like you can't dash into them and hurt them. But this adds a nice little complexity to enemy design, I feel. We don't just have regular enemies that you can jump off and do one specific thing, we have variants of each enemies, which also saves me a lot of development time. If I want to make a new enemy type, I can just slap a metal helmet and a bucket on a regular enemy, and now there are different variants. But the enemies, we basically have regular types which can be destroyed by dashing or potions or anything. We have blocking enemies which aren't going to hurt you and can be used as platforms, but can maybe not be jumped on. And then we have metal enemies which can only be broken with potions or squishing objects or things of a similar ilk. This adds variety to gameplay. Also, the metal enemies look funny. Finally, let's talk about visual designs. I am super happy with how every single one of these enemies look. The enemies, first of all, let's talk about the different enemy types visually. The first enemy is the bean girl. This is the blue enemy with the flower on its head, and it is growing out of a bean. Oh boy, do I like this enemy. I originally didn't like this enemy a whole lot when designing it. I thought it looked out of place in-game, but upon testing it and looking at this enemy in levels and interacting with the player, it is my absolute favourite thing I have designed for this game since the main character, since Pep-Pel. I love Bean Girl oh so much. She's lovely. She has a little flower on her head. She has little tentacle arms. There's a little unique thing with the tentacle arms, which I will talk about later because it's stupidly complex. But she has a nice little bounce to her character, and when harming the player, she will headbutt the player character. The metal variant, again, really love how this one looks. Instead of a bean she's growing out of a bucket, she has a little metal hat, and she has a chin guard. Her shield in this version is a metal variant of her wooden shield for her regular version. Oh boy, do I love this character. Oh, so much. I don't have a huge amount of things to say about the actual design. It's mostly just something that I thought was very silly when sketching and went with it, but she has a big blobby head, which indicates you can jump on her. She looks silly, and that's about it. I love Bean Girl with all my heart. The next enemy design is the hover plant. This has a fun little propeller on its head and is a weird little plant mouth. I also quite like how this one looks. The reason for this design is I wanted a enemy type that would serve the same function as the Bean Girl, being a neutral enemy that doesn't really pose much threat and stand still, but would be in midair. So I had to make a enemy design that would fly. My design for this was a weird little plant thing with a hover head. I like how this looks a lot. There's a nice little weight as it flies back and forth, and the mouth moves around back and forth, its tongue wiggles around. It looks silly. It has a fun little metal helmet in the metal variant with big spikes on it, which indicate it is a hazard. The actual helmet design is inspired by Griffith's helmet from Berserk, because it has a weird little claw-like opening on the head. I like how this enemy looks. Very simple, very fun. I end up reusing this design later on in a different enemy. I like how it looks a lot. The next enemy we have is the Fuzzy Spitter. This is a very easy enemy to design because it's just a bunch of overlapping sprites with a little shader to make them move around to indicate that they are fuzzy looking. And it's just some big old lips that drool and spit at you. This design was originally quite different in my sketching. It was originally going to look like a sea slug and have a lot more wiggly moving parts, but it was way too complex and it was stupid and it didn't read very well, so I redesigned it to be a little fuzzy little thing with big lips. I really love the animations for this, and I think visually in levels, because I can move around the fuzzy little parts to it, it can look like a weird little growth on walls, which is kind of what it's designed to be. It's a weird little thing that grows on walls or floats on things. It's like evil moss that spits at you. And it looks like a hazard, and it's pretty cute. The metal variant of this, I just slapped spikes onto the fuzzy parts. I wasn't really sure what to do with the metal variant, so I just kind of put spikes on the fuzzy parts. The final design is perhaps the end point of the hover plant's evolution. This is when it grows a body, it has a big old stem, and it spits at you. Similar to this Fuzzy Spitter, this one moves around. It has more of its design based on the animation. There isn't really a whole lot of design difference from the hover version. I just slap a nice little vine to its body, and that's about it. But one complexity to this, you may be able to tell with the way the body is animating, that I am animating a sprite shape. This is a system I had to create with code for this devlog, because there isn't a very easy way to animate sprite shapes, I found. What I do for this is I add pivot points to the animation. These are empty points to the animation rig, and I move this around in the animator. Then I added a script to the sprite shape that will move the sprite shape's points to these pivot points. This means I can actually animate a sprite shape in Unity. I had to do this a lot for the plants because a lot of them have little viney parts, which are kind of tricky to animate with sprites without them having any sort of rigging behind them. So I thought the best way to do this was add a sprite shape and just move them around using that system. Overall, I think I like this enemy design more as a hazard, but visually it's probably my least favourite, but I do think the animations for it look nice. It's probably my least favourite because, well, it's not very visually unique. It's just a hover plant, but with a vine stem. But overall, I still like this enemy a whole lot. And that's it for Devlog. A lot of this was very simple, just basic design works for enemy AI systems, but since the enemy AI are very simple and don't move, there wasn't really a whole lot to code for. The complexity for this was actually designing enemies that are interesting to levels, and also enemies that are visually interesting. In fact, the main difficulty of this was probably finding a way to animate sprite shapes that looked nice. And luckily, I think I have achieved such a system. And I think visually, all of my enemies look A, unique, and 2, readable in-game, and also work well in level design. What do you think of the enemies I have designed for my game? In the comments below, do you think that Bean Girl is the best character I have ever designed ever? Or do you think that Moss Dinosaur I've designed is the best character I've ever designed ever? Personally, me, little old me, I think Bean Girl is the best. I would take her home, I would give her a little kiss on her little bean head, and I'd say, I love you very much, Bean Girl, you're my very special daughter, I love you so much. I'd plant her in my garden, and I'd make a whole garden of Bean Girls, who I'm now realizing probably isn't a bean, she's probably a seed that's growing a flower out of it. In the next devlog, I'll make levels.